the discussion as well. Okay, there was a question from the middle table.
Thanks very much. So I'm from the Impact Catalyst, where we work closely. We're a collaborative regional development platform. And we've recently launched in Mpumalanga, and where the World Bank, the country director, was our keynote speaker. And I do agree, we need to have more conversations. We need to align what is happening there, because there's a lot happening, already happening in the province. But a lot of the time, we don't have a view and we don't have access to what is happening, because we are reinventing the wheel. We are doing studies over and over again. We are putting money into doing things that's already been done. So our aim is to really, and we've launched in Limpopo and Northern Cape as well. And through the Office of the Premier, we work closely with the provincial government as well as all the levels of government. For example, we are now aligning with Steve Twete and Emalakhleni municipality, working on identifying and opportunities that can create jobs in those areas, but also aligning the stakeholders and the role players. That is key. Collaboration is key in the transition in Mpumalanga. It's amazing to see if you get private sector and government and communities just to talk to each other, what can happen. So I just want to, I agree with what is said in the room, and we're working closely with the CSR on the Learning Factory, and which is almost the crux of today, is reskilling for tomorrow. But I think one of the role players, maybe ESCOM, who is doing a lot and is willing to do a lot. I think they are now hit hard with load shedding and all of that. But on the other hand, they are really trying to get a handle on what is happening in the province in the transition. So we really need to take the private sector, the public sector, and the communities along this road. So if you want to know more about what we are doing, please come and we can have a chat, provide you with more of the opportunities and the programs we are doing, because it's large scale. It needs to be sustainable, scalable, replicable, and it needs to promote collaboration. That is key, collaboration and transparency, which I think there's brilliant things happening, like this forum, happening in Mpumalanga, but we need to align, and we need to, like Aradhana said, prioritize, because we can't do everything at once. Slowing down, like the gentleman said, just taking that step back and say, who and what are we going to do? And who's going to do that? Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Steve. My name is Vitumela Molite, and I am from the Congress of South African Trade Unions, COSATU. I think we can't speak to the issue of education, skills, and training without speaking to workers in the trade union movement, which is a key constituency in this discussion. There has to be a more coordinated approach in these discussions, because we have academia, and then we have industry, the trade union movement, and some entrepreneurship in the midst of it, which is business in most cases. So the voice that I believe that is missing here is the voice of the workers, which is entirely off in this program entirely. We have commissioners on the PCC who are from the trade union movement, and I believe if they were incorporated into this discussion, it would be more balanced. For example, the core value chain is one of the most unionized. And the voice of the workers in the core value chain is an important one, especially when we speak to the Mpumalanga region. So it would be quite important to speak to those workers and to speak to representatives of those workers, because this value chain has the most they enjoy the most, it's the most coordinated and they enjoy the most collective bargaining as opposed to other sectors. So I just feel like the unions are a major part of this and there should be some form of incorporation. When it comes to what we've done as COSATU in the Just Transition, we have an entire research that was conducted that speaks to the just transition, not only on the coal value chain or coal and mining sector. We have an approach that is that appreciates the interconnectedness of the industries. We are looking at transport and not just only EVs, but the transport sector in its entirety, including public transport. We look at agriculture, which is going to be a sector that will probably absorb a lot of workers that would be leaving the coal value chain in terms of this transition and decommissioning. So it's going to be important for us to speak to workers. Workers have ideas, they have solutions, they are part of these sectors and they should be part of the planning and solution building with regards to the just transition. It's going to be very difficult for us to go to workers and speak about a just transition that they know nothing about. So when we do these consultations, and we've always highlighted the fact that we're open to collaboration as the trade union movement, especially as COSATU, and we'd be open to coordinating and assisting to get in touch with workers on the ground so that this is not a transition that is imposed on workers, but workers are a part of it. So I think perhaps going forward, when we speak to skills, we need to have a decent representation of the working class in the room, and so that we're able to then get into this transition with workers buy-in. Other than that, workers will reject the just transition, and it will be something that is going to be very problematic for the future of not only our economy, but our country as a whole. Thank you very much.
Yeah, these are very fair and relevant points, and certainly something that we intend to do. The program that we've designed from the PCC perspective in terms of bottom-up, the kinds of the bottom-up processes we've talked about today, workers and communities are a key focus of that engagement. But hear your point about representation today. And as I say, hopefully this is the beginning of many conversations, and it seems to me there's a excitement and an urgency around this. So we're excited about that, and we're really sorry that we're not able to fit everything in to today's session, but certainly something that we will look at. I'm conscious that people must be getting hungry, and there were a few more hands in the room. So what I propose is let's break for lunch. And let's try to have a shorter lunch. So let's, what time are we at now? If we can be back just after 2, so let's try to get to as close as 2 as possible. And then I'll sit with the team and we'll talk a little bit about the program and see if we can build in some more time for discussion so that we can get some of the additional comments in the room in. Yeah, and thank you for your enthusiastic participation so far. I appreciate some of the feedback and pushback, and hope you have a really great lunch. Lunch is down the corridor, so just past where you had the tea, there's a little restaurant to your right. Lunch is in there, and we'll see you back here as close to 2 as you can manage. Thank you. Great. Okay, so let's get started. We've still got a fairly busy program. And you know, I overheard Janice over lunch saying, you know, we know each other, but don't really know each other. And part of today is about getting to know each other. So it is fast, it is lots of information, big information overload, but I'm already observing in the breaks and at the tables, people making connections they hadn't made before. And that's really what we hope to achieve here. So there's a need for us to coordinate better. I think that's come up over and over. Okay, so the next section is really for us to just be thinking about how we start to plan together and how we start to think about long-term planning. So we're going to kick it off with an overview of the skills planning process within DHET, so that those of us who work in the space can start to see some connection points. And then we're going to have a discussion from people who kind of in the process of doing economic diversification, thinking about skills in particular value chains. And we'll wrap up this afternoon time pending with sort of a next steps discussion. What do we want to do with this group as we go forward? So I'm going to ask Mampoku Kuluve from DHET. She's the Director for System Monitoring and Labour Market Intelligence, and she's going to give us a quick overview of skills planning within DHET and hopefully touch on some good collaboration points. Thank you.
Good afternoon, colleagues. My name is Mampoku Kuluve, as I've already been introduced, and I am the director responsible for system monitoring and labor market intelligence in the Department of Higher Education and Training. So my presentation today, colleagues, I'm just going to be focusing on the work that we are doing in terms of identifying skills needs and the interventions that we think needs to be put in place to address the skills needs. Next slide. Okay, what we're trying to do is to begin to unravel the mismatches that exist between the supply of skills in the country as well as the demand for skills. And we do that by beginning to ask ourselves research questions. And I think that most of these questions have been mentioned already in the discussions. So one of the questions that we ask ourselves is, do we know what skills exist in the labor market? I think one of the participants raised a question around, do we understand exactly what we mean, or do we have the same understanding around education and training? So we need to begin to ask this question so that we know that from the onset, we understand, we have a common understanding of what we're all trying to achieve. And then the second most important question that we ask ourselves is, how do we know whether there is imbalance between skill supply and demand? What are the indicators that can begin to assist us in responding to that questions? And how do we understand these concepts? Because I mean, skills means different things to different people. And how do we measure this? I mean, we speak about informal education and training. We speak about formal education and training. So we need to understand, how do we begin to measure all the skill supply and demand in the country, taking into account that we have different ways of education and training in the country. Next slide. Where do I point? I have no idea. Okay. Go back, please. Where do I point? Oh, okay. All right, thank you. And then this slide is about understanding what DDG Mvalo was talking about, demand-led planning in the country. But before we get to that, colleagues need to be reminded that before 1994, apartheid sought to reduce imbalances between skill supply and demand through manpower planning. And that was easily done because, I mean, they were planning only for the minority in the country. They were able to say that we need a certain number of artisans in the country. But today, manpower planning has lost its flavor because of, among others, rapid and continuing changes in the economy, labor market, and the society, and of course, climate change issues and the issues around digital technologies. And this does not necessarily mean that there can be no skills planning in the country. We need to continue to plan for the skills that we require now, for the skills that we require in the intermediate future, and the skills that we require in the future. So for us as DHET, we have adopted what we call a demand-led planning, which begins to provide signals of the kinds of skills needed in the labor market. And we're saying signals, colleagues, because at this point in time, we are not able to tell of the quantities that we require in the labor market. I know that in most of the consultations that we have, the stakeholders will always ask us, but how many? You're saying that engineers are in shortage or engineers are in high demand. How many engineers do we need? So for us to be able to do that, we can only be able to get that information if we're working closely with the employers. But at this point in time, with the sort of information that we have and the data, we are unable to answer that question. Sure, technology. Okay, and how do we identify demand at national level? So we use quite a number of methodologies, quantitative indicators, as well as qualitative measures to identify occupations that are in high demand and occupations that are in shortage. For the quantitative indicators, colleagues, we're focusing more on employment-related indicators, the wages indicators, and the vacancy indicators. I'm not going to dwell much into that. I don't want to be too technical. And then the qualitative measures, which is quite important and something that we have done quite rigorously in the previous years, leading to the publication of the critical skills list, was to begin to engage with both our business and labor and the consultations that we have had at NETLEC. So leading to that, as a department, we are able to produce every 2 years a list of occupations in high demand, which begins to inform our enrollment planning, our resource allocations, and begin to assist our learners and graduates in terms of career guidance. And then we also produce what we call the critical skills list that we produce on behalf of Home Affairs. Home Affairs use that list to ensure that they get foreign nationals to fill occupations that we currently do not have the necessary skills in the country. Labor is here. Please, I know you don't like this list, but I'm sure you understand the dynamics around what we have in the country. On the one hand, yes, we have high levels of unemployment, but on the other hand, we have shortage of skills in the country. And this is mainly around the fact that we do not necessarily know what employers want. So the graduates that are there, they don't necessarily meet the skills needs that our employers want. And then also we have produced the skill strategy to respond to the economic reconstruction and recovery plan. And this is just to ensure that skills, it's not a constraint. You know, it's the implementation of the ERRP is not constrained by the lack of skills in the country. And how do we identify demand at sectoral and provincial level? We do this through our CETAs, who reports on priority occupations and skills gaps in their annual sector plans. I think my colleague will be presenting on that. I won't dwell much into it. And also as a department, we have developed a methodology to assist us with the development of the provincial list of occupations in high demand. And in the next year, we're going to be piloting it into provinces, Mpumalanga and Western Cape. And then recently, there has also been a shift in terms of understanding the type of skills that are required at a sector level. For example, when we published our critical skills list, there were so many queries that were raised around the health professionals that are not included in the critical skills list, and then they are in shortage in the country. And based on those discussions, we then decided that we need to focus on understanding better the dynamics, the supply and demand of skills in relation to health professionals. And then, of course, this is something that we're hoping that we will be able to do in terms of identifying the skills needed for just transition and climate change. And based on the discussions that are happening here, it seems, Mr. Mbalo, that it's not going to be an easy one, because we know that there is we need to take into account the value chain. You know, we can't necessarily focus on a particular sector, but then in the discussion again, issues around reprioritization came quite strongly. And I think there we're just giving an example that other government departments are also focusing on providing skills for their related sector. We know of the work streams that the presidency is managing, one critical one being the digital sector. Okay, why do we need to understand demand? I think colleagues are aware of this, to provide skills training programs that are responsive to the needs of the labor market. If we are able to do that, obviously the mismatches that exist in the labor market will be reduced. And then we need to ensure that skills are not a constraint to growth of the economy and specific economic sectors. We're talking about climate change, and Mr. Mvalo mentioned the fact that as we're beginning to engage around these economic strategies, we need to be thinking about the skills that will be required in those particular sectors. And we need to therefore produce graduates with the skills that are needed in those particular sectors. And how does information about demand help us? I'm not going to go through that list, colleagues, because there's one important slide that I need to spend most of my time, but you will get the presentation and you will engage with that. And then what does this mean for skills for a just climate change transition? Colleagues, we need, I can't see my, can I be able to move with this?
Yeah, that's
okay. Thank you so much. I think we need to work together to identify the sectors that will be affected. For example, we already know about the energy sector. Yesterday, we were engaging around the hydrogen sector. Because of the value chain, we have included mining there. As I was sitting, I've had mining being mentioned. Because of the just transition element, we also have to take into account the legal sector is quite important. And then the education and digital sectors are quite important as well. And we also need to work collaboratively to begin to identify what kinds of occupations will be in demand. We have heard about the jobs that will be created, but it will be important to begin to indicate the areas, the occupations that we will need, the artisans that we will need, the professionals that we will need, the managers that we will need. This information is quite important for us to engage with our education and training institutions in terms of the program offerings that they need to offer. And then we need to work collaboratively to identify skills gaps that exist in the workforce. I mean, we spoke about reskilling and upskilling of our workers, especially those that have lost jobs in sectors that have become redundant as a result of green economy and so forth. So we need to think about what sort of programs do we need to put in place to ensure that we incorporate them back or integrate them back into the world of work. And these colleagues, we need to bear in mind that we need to think about the transition in terms of short, medium, and long-term approaches. As a collective, we need to be thinking about what skills or what processes do we need to put in place to enable people to find employment in the short term, in the medium, as long as in the long term. And then we have done some research. I've already indicated in terms of the list of occupations in high demand, the critical skills list and the skills strategy. And these are some of the occupations that we have identified linked to this particular sector. I won't mention them. My time is limited. And these are the possible areas of collaboration, colleagues. We need to work together to identify skills needs, critical occupations. Those are the ones that we know that currently we can't find in the country, and begin to work together to identify the skills gaps. I mean, we know Minister made an example about that we need green artisans, which means that electrician will still be an electrician, but there are some elements of task and specialization that we need to take into account, and therefore that will require reskilling and upskilling of existing workforce. And then the prioritization of the skills levy to support the just transition. I mean, we had our international speaker saying that we don't necessarily need to focus on the skills levy system, but the investment in this particular sector need to take into account and prioritizes the skills that will be required, and then produce sufficient and appropriate graduates needed to support the just transition. We can only be able to do this if employers begin to indicate to us the sort of skills that they require. And then the development of qualification and programs that responds to the needs of the just transition. in cases where there are new and emerging occupations, we need to be thinking about the development of qualifications and program, review and updating curricula and the career guidance. And then colleagues, we have recently published what we call the concept note for the master skills plan. And this concept note is intended to help us with the development of the reconceptualized human resource development strategy of South Africa. We know that this was last developed in 2009. We therefore need to reimagine it by taking into account the climate change issues, the digital technologies into account, and also to ensure that we only have one skills development plan in the country. Currently, there are so many plans that we have, but we're hoping that going forward, what we need as a country is one human resource development strategy, which will then be supported by its implementation plan, which we call the countrywide master skills plan. And this will guide, steer, and frame the implementation of the human resource development strategy of the country. So the aim, colleagues, is to ensure that we're not going to be having multiple plans at national, at provincial, and so forth, but there will be one human resource development strategy in the country and its associated one countrywide master skills plan going forward. And then these are expected to serve as a high-level countrywide coordinated response to key skills needs identified for economic and social development. And they are envisaged to address imbalances for skill supply and demand in the country and bring coherence, rationalization, and improved efficiency of skills planning and delivery system in the country. And the just transition and climate change and the hydrogen economy are all central to the development of this countrywide master skills plan. So there needs to be alignment in terms of the skills requirements at a sector level, at a local level, at a provincial level, and ultimately at a national level. We are currently consulting various stakeholders on the concept note with the intention of ensuring that we're taking each stakeholder's input and comment into account while we're still conceptualizing how the format and the shape of this human resource development strategy, as well as the countrywide master skills plan, will look like. Sure, I rushed.
Thank you. I wonder what happens to us. I remember when I was at school having these absolute anxiety attacks because we had to speak for 2 minutes and I'm like, what am I going to talk about? And now we all easily speak for 20, 25 minutes. So thank you. That's really interesting. So just a quick question on this concept note. Is it possible that we can consult with some of the group here? On the concept note, is it possible we can consult with some of the group here? I think that could be an interesting exercise for some of us. Okay, excellent. Thank you. So I think what we'll do is we'll run through the next presentations, and then we'll have some time for discussion. And then we're going to do a discussion within our tables around the next steps in the future of the work program. So online, we have Dr. Rebecca Masarumule, who works in the hydrogen space within DSI and has been doing a lot of work in thinking about skills integration as we implement some of the hydrogen planning. So Dr. Masarumule, can you hear us? Are you online?
Yes, I am.
Great. Take it away. Thank you.
Okay. I'll say next slide when I'm ready for the next slide. So the purpose of today's discussion is really to discuss integrating climate transition into skills planning. And then I'm going to go to a very specific case around the hydrogen economy. And I'm presenting work that was completed in partnership with a couple of partners. Department of Higher Education and Training was really co-sponsoring the development of a document that was released by our minister yesterday, SIA, UK Pact, and so forth. Next slide. So if you look at the policies that support the hydrogen economy, we have the hydrogen RDI strategy, The green transport strategy actually mentioned from 2015 actually mentions fuel cell electric vehicles for the road transport. We just had the green hydrogen commercialization strategy that was released by Cabinet for public discussions and response. We had the Hydrogen Society roadmap launched by our minister in February this year, and then the Just Energy Transition Framework. This is work between the PCC as well as the DMRE. And if you look at the Just Transition Investment Plan that was launched by President Ramaphosa at COP, it speaks to, you know, three main pillars, you know, electric vehicles, be it battery or fuel cell, green hydrogen, as well as decarbonization of our power fleet as critical. And really the work that we're doing, the Hydrogen Society Roadmap, is really to understand that how do we ensure that hydrogen and hydrogen fuel cell technologies will foster inclusive growth. What will foster inclusive growth? Next slide. So the Hydrogen Society Roadmap is looking towards an inclusive and sustainable and competitive hydrogen economy by 2050, with a goal of achieving just and inclusive net zero carbon economic growth for societal well-being by 2050. And really we ran a process during COVID to really aligning stakeholders around a common vision as to the way forward. What is the role of hydrogen? What does success look like to different partners? And how do we unlock investment decisions by the private sector, both in South Africa as well as foreign direct investment? Next slide. So the Hydrogen Society Roadmap came up with 6 high-level outcomes. I'm going to go very quickly in building sector and power sector, transport sector, looking at decarbonization of heavy industries like mining, iron and steel sector. But then we have two of the outcomes is really focusing on South Africa exporting both green hydrogen and its derivatives like green ammonia, as well as fuel cell components for fuel cells and electrolyzers. And last but not least, really, you are using hydrogen not in everyday uses, but in industry. Hydrogen is currently being used in its form of gray. But the question is, how do we start using hydrogen across all sectors, be it that I've mentioned before, but also getting it to the people at a price that is comparable with existing energy carriers. Next slide. So in terms of the Hydrogen Society Roadmap, we had 6 pillars to it. And I'm proud to announce that yesterday our minister launched the very last component that was completed. So we did a study looking at if we're going to move towards a green hydrogen economy. So remember, we know we're using gray hydrogen on a daily basis in the industry sector, especially refineries. Even globally, we're using green hydrogen. And South Africa, we know, is responsible for 1% of the global gray hydrogen demand through Sasol and other partners like PetroSA. But if we were going to move South Africa to the green hydrogen economy, using our sunshine, using our wind resource, how does the TVET ecosystem play a role in ensuring that jobs will be given to those who are most likely to be left behind? Next slide. So because we couldn't imagine the hydrogen economy by extrapolating the past forward, we actually took a scenario approach. And I'm going to focus on the 4th scenario, which is called an all-inclusive portfolio. So what if we go hard? What if we go in this direction? We go hard and we go fast, right? So no regrets. You keep on moving and you don't start and stop. You keep on moving in that direction. So this is looking at domestic consumption of green hydrogen, as well as the exports of green ammonia, green hydrogen, as well as green steel, looking like at exporting fuel cell components for electrolyzers and components to the rest of the world. Next slide. Keep on going until I get everything. Keep on going. Keep on going. So if we were to move in that direction, so all of the scenarios, you get some type of economic growth, but the last scenario, which is the most exciting, is the number of jobs that come to the overall economy. And we're looking at a total of, sorry, my slides are in my way, sorry. Looking at close to 3.2 million jobs across the economy and economic growth of 11.4%. Next slide. And if you look at where those jobs are coming in, just just for the green hydrogen economy. Most of the jobs are actually going to be coming in the iron and steel sector, followed by the PGM mining sector, and then followed by the power generation sector. So this is jobs in the power sector, but not coal mining jobs, but jobs in renewables, wind and solar, onshore wind and solar PV. And I think this is critical to note because if you look at the huge challenge or concern, really the concern is if we are moving away from coal-fired power plants, what are the implications for the coal mining sector? So you could have a movement of coal miners to the PGM mining sector. Sorry. So you can have coal miners move to the PGM mining sector, but also into other sectors of the economy. And then you have ammonia, green hydrogen production. But what I think is most interesting is while the sectors for fuel cells and electrolyzers, it starts out very slow. Over time, it actually overtakes the ammonia and green hydrogen production sector. So this is really important that we aren't short-minded and not understand that we really need to do high-value products as well as low-value products like commodities like ammonia and hydrogen. But also, I think what we were most excited about as well is that in addition to the jobs in the overarching economy, you also have jobs for TVETs, and just under 100,000 jobs for what we call green artisans and technicians will be available to the current and future youth in this future employees who are artisans and technicians. And I think the reason why we did this study is because we understood that with the unemployment rate, where it is, I think something just above 30%, the actual unemployment rate for TVET graduates is almost similar to that of a high school graduate. So for us, it was critical that we really made an effort to understand if the TVET college sector could be actively involved in this transition. Next slide. So in addition to doing the analysis, so I think the previous speaker, Mama Poco, she mentioned that when we're doing the skills, the master skills plan, what was really critical is that we have an understanding of what the demand is. So we don't want to create graduates that are not needed in the sector. What we need to do is, so the first step was really understanding is there a future demand, right? If there's a future demand, what does it look like? Which sectors are willing to give us the most jobs? So if you look at it, green steel is going to give the majority of jobs. So a lot of the projects in Saldanha Bay, Vanderbilt Park, I think reviving the iron and steel sector is going to be critical, and so forth. But also, so what we did is we have 51 key actions that need to be taken in order to ensure that we can put things in place. So in terms of ensuring that the TVET ecosystem is put in place properly, we need to have ensure that we have, let's say, for instance, ensuring that you have excellent physical and technological infrastructure is critical, because really this is new jobs, new areas of focus, and we don't have the existing infrastructure at the TVET college system to make things happen. So we're going to have to invest heavily in infrastructure so students have the right infrastructure to do studying, institutionalized, anticipatory governance. So the governance structures also have to be changed. But one thing I thought was really interesting was inadequate funding for the TVET college system. So they need to have adequate and sustained funding for the TVET system in order to make sure that the students can get the funding they need to actually go through the process of becoming green artisans and technicians. Next slide. So this is just at a high level, some of the actions and activities that need to happen. So under transformative training and education, develop a clear skills master plan for for green hydrogen, for reskilling, upskilling, and new skills. So this is work that will feed into the master skills plan. Implement a selection criteria for TVET colleges to participate in green specialization centers. So we have very specific actions that need to be taken to put the TVET college system in the right direction. Next slide. And then also, again, in terms of centers of specialization, also are going to be very critical to ensuring that that we can put the TVET college system in the right direction. Next slide. Okay, so this is my last slide. So really, one of the issues around the Hydrogen Society Roadmap was this issue on gender equality and social inclusion. And what we really learned through the TVET study was that really the TVET college system will be critical to ensuring that gender equality and social inclusion is embedded into the Hydrogen Society Roadmap. So what we'd use is the TVETs to recruit women and youth through the TVET centers of specialization, as well as, you know, the issue of digitalization of the TVET training program. So this would include, you know, ensuring that students from across the country, no matter where they live, can also participate. So this is moving from the brick and mortar system to a digital platform. We were able to do this under COVID. We did training. I think we trained just under 40 students from across South Africa. And because of COVID, we had to move towards a online platform with in-person training in some cases. And we were actually able to get absorption of some of those trainees into actual companies. And then I think strengthening the skills employment linkages. So for women to meet the needs of the the green hydrogen economy is critical. So, and then the reorientation of the curriculum, redesigning it to make sure that you can have work-based learning was really the last, I think, key recommendation to ensure that the movement towards a green hydrogen economy was included women, youth, and persons with disability. Next slide. And then last but not least, these are the key actions at the high level across from now to 2050. I won't really go into detail, but what we've learned is that it is possible to move in the right direction. And with enough accountability across different departments, DSI, DHET, even Department of Labor, we can make sure that the youth are fully engaged and included in the process. Next slide. So in closing, I'd just like to say that the TVET sector can be a critical enabler for the hydrogen economy, especially as we use hydrogen to recover from the COVID-19 challenges in this country. The TVET centers of specialization will be very important to this. And then we really need to be flexible around how we deploy our centers of specialization. And I think last but not least, I think that we need more money towards the TVET college system. There's not enough money being put into it. And really, if we're going to have the TVET college system playing that role, we need to ensure that we give it the money that's required. But, and then last but not least, I think partnerships. So that's why I was so happy to present today, because the partnerships with the PCC, as well as other key stakeholders, NGOs, international, local partners will be critical so we can improve the governance around the TVET system so we can get the outcomes and impact that we're expecting to see. Thank you so much. Hello, I'm finished. I'm finished.
Hear us. Mic is off. Okay, thank you very much. We appreciate it. We're going to take a few more presentations in the room, and then we'll have some questions. If hopefully you can hang around for that. Thanks, Rebecca. Yeah, and then our next speaker is Mpho, and I'm looking forward to your input. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We will run a skills program for virtual presentation. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're still awake. I am aware that the dimmed lights, that's not me. SANEA is not me, EWSETA. I would like to present the SANEA report, but it's good work that's been done. My name is Mpho Mokapile, and I'm from the Energy and Water SETA, and we are a public entity to the Department of Higher Education. a lot of what's in my slide has been covered, so I'll try to keep the 10 minutes. I had prepared for 15 minutes with exceeding with 2 minutes. I will consult the virtual referee if I'm cut out. I think just before the slides are reflected, the conversation in this room, I know we're talking about the just energy transition, and I've been sitting there and pretending to be a young person who's completing matric in the Mpumalanga area and really thinking about my future when South Africa is currently talking about the just energy transition. And a couple of questions that if I was completing matric would be that I'm probably going to get into a TVET that has a curriculum that was responding to the fossil fuel and qualifications that were, which means I'm already left behind, and which means the process is already excluding me. And I think as we are planning, as we are putting interventions and budgeting for, is there a pointer here that I can use? As we are planning, as we are implementing, and I think the comment has been, there's a lot of work that is done in Mpumalanga. I work with a lot of stakeholders from a PSET space and also from industry. And a lot of players have been asking, we want to go work in Mpumalanga, even the international players, what are we doing in Mpumalanga? And there's a lot of noise. And just a couple of weeks ago, we sat with the young people in Mpumalanga area and they have no idea what's going on. They say we are seeing people come in, we are hearing things that are happening, we have no idea what's going on. And yes, there's a talk on energy transition and just energy transition. I think the question is that if we are transitioning now and we're saying we are leaving no one behind, the reality is that a lot of people have already been left behind. And it's the reality. I might need a short course. Where do I point? Oh, there. Yeah, MICT might. So I think just from an introduction of what we do, we are mandated by Department of Higher Education to determine the skills demand in the country for the energy and the water sector. And we are not training, we are facilitating from the supply of skills. And what we do is, if you look at the current NSDP, is a demand-led way, it's industry-driven planning and industry delivery. Often what we've done as CETAs is that we've determined our own demand using the SSP, the WSP collection, and then we would say the information there is not so accurate, but we would plan on it anyway. And the approach now has been that how do we go out to industry and get industry to talk about and to determine demand? Greatest challenge that we've been seeing is that industry cannot tell future demand. Most of the companies and the employers know what they need today. So informing us on what you need today and I train today, 3 years later is no longer relevant. So it's the biggest challenge we currently have on how do we balance understanding the demand today and the demand for tomorrow and responding with QCTO, with the curricula that also needs to change, with the energy that is transitioning currently. So that's all from a demand perspective. Some of the current challenges we are having is determining the future skills. And as we are talking about the just transition and the new economies and the new industries, for as long as we do not know the timing or the type of economies that we are going to be establishing or we're going to build in different provinces, we're not going to be properly planning for the skills that are required. So from a demand perspective, that's what I do. And from a supply, also what I think we've often heard of irrelevant training. So industry-led qualification development is what we've been driving for, to say we cannot develop a qualification without industry. We are going to involve industry so that tomorrow they don't turn back and say this qualification is irrelevant. The distance of the TVET colleges also from planning, even today, the distance of TVET colleges who are supposed to be producing the vocational students is also an issue. Just an example, we've just returned last week with Khartsibande and Kangala lecturers. They attended an advanced training course for renewable in Milan. And they said, we are lecturers in electrical. We talk in renewable, we've got modules, but we actually had no idea this is what's happening. We had no idea on how big renewable energy is, from planning to implementation. And I think if we don't get our TVET lecturers away, this supply of skills will remain an issue. So we're looking at industry-led development, qualification development, approval of workplaces. Someone has mentioned the work-based learning, very critical. We have constantly receiving a list of learners of TVET graduates, not graduates, learners who have completed theory and are awaiting workplaces so that they can get their qualification. A long list, and workplaces are not opening for them. And the reality is the requirement for them to be qualified. So what are we doing if we are saying it's a just energy transition and we've put a young person for 3 years in class and they don't have the paper to knock on anyone's door to look for a job? So there's a lot of, I think, being in South Africa with our past injustices and inequalities is very different from sitting in a developed country and talking just energy transition. There's a lot, it's difficult. There's a lot of things that needs to be considered, and we need not to simplify it, or else we must just talk about the energy transition and leave the just elements in that conversation. I'm going to potentially skip some of the, and I think I think I've probably touched on this. When we look at the skills development context in South Africa, and I'm saying South Africa because often I've been sitting with a number of Europeans. If you're European in this room, it's not because I'm not trying to offend you. And I've been sitting in a number of conversations on social impact, on the work that is done, that in South Africa, we're trying to redress past inequalities. You're trying to industrialize, you're trying to develop. And I've put this here so that I talk to the pace of transition. And South Africa, the question would be, have we determined our own pace of transition? I think someone has already spoken about that, because that pace is going to take some of these things into account. You've got inequality, you've got post-school education system that cannot keep up with the changes in the world of work without the transition. We've got changes in the nature of job. I'm looking at the renewable energy. We do count the number of jobs that are going to be created, but those are gigs. It's at construction. It means someone needs to understand that I'll get a gig job here when they're implementing, they're constructing, and I can move to another place for construction, because maintenance of solar farms and wind farms is not demand, is not required, is not labor intensive. So there's an understanding of the type of jobs that are going to be coming in South Africa with renewable energy. I've talked about the quality of training in the PSET, which is public colleges, which goes to infrastructure and lecturers. I think the sad thing is that if you've got, and I'm going to give an example with the hotel industry, is that a yellow card I'm going to consult. If you've got a TVET college that's providing hospitality and electrical engineering, they need facilities just for hospitality. They need facilities for electrical engineering, and often they don't have those. Higher number of unqualified graduates, but limited skills. I think someone has already spoken to that. And the qualification development that takes forever in South Africa, and the need for that curriculum review. I am running, and the question I was asking is that, have we left some people behind already with where we are? Communities, TVET colleges, youth and women. And I think the reality is that yes, some people are already behind. I am probably going to jump to slide. I'm not going to talk to the work that we've done. There are a number of partners in this room that we've been working with. If you can just press the next slide, it might assist me. And maybe let me focus on this, just as unemployment rate, we know it says 34%. And when we talk about just energy transition, you can press again. We often talk to the employed, the green part. And in that employed, our statistic from employers indicate that we've got a very aging workforce in the energy and the water sector. And our upskilling and reskilling plans for DHET often is for that workforce that's aging. And the 34% that consists of 64% of youth is often not catered for. And that's what I'm saying. It's that young person who is completing matric today and who's entering the education space, who is already left behind. Next slide. And maybe just our focus from EWSETA, we've been driving inclusive economic participation, where we have looked at industry-driven training, and we've looked at the PSET readiness, and I'm going to touch just those two, and enterprise development. From a TVET PSET readiness perspective, we focus on TVET college capacitation, which is an infrastructure and lecturer development. We've also looked at qualification development and involvement of universities. And I'm going to say, from a university perspective, the NSDP now calls for focus on high level skills, is that the ability for South Africa to plan have its own plans right now, transition plans from an economy perspective, from scaling perspective, and also reduce the fragmentation that we are seeing in our country is a challenge. Everyone is doing something in this space. We're all spending money, but it's difficult for us to see the return on that investment. So we have been funding a number of postgraduates in the energy sector, specifically amongst women. The statistic also show that in managerial position and in executive position, we've got a lot of males, senior engineers, and therefore we've been driving the involvement of women in that space. Enterprise development, very key. I think CSIR has mentioned the project that we have with them, because we realize that if you're talking about inclusive economic participation and not bringing the SMMEs along, and when it comes to awareness on what hydrogen is, I can imagine going into communities and we're calling it community consultation, and we get into a community, we talk green hydrogen, have no idea what you're talking about. And yet we call that consultation and say we've capacitated them to be able to participate. So that's one area that we focused on. We've partnered also with the banks are coming on board with driving SMMEs in this space also. If you can career guidance, maybe let me focus on career guidance. And I think someone said that we do talk to career guidance very late in metric, where people probably are solid in their thinking. But we focus on career guidance specifically in the rural areas where we know information does not reach the young people. If you, before I get a red card, you can move again. So these are just some of the focus area that we've looked at. And maybe let me just mention one key area. The first bullet point there talks to what we noticed as EWSETA was that the IPPs, and I'm going to talk to the IPPs, we often had Saratech, I know we've got some people from Saratech here. We noted that our young people were only trained, I used to call it to climb the wind farm, to climb and clean. And if it's broken, bring it down. And we would have international players coming to fix and operate. And that we cannot prepare a young South African just for that. There's nothing just about that. So what we've also looked at is that we informed the bid requirements in the last year. So in bid window 5, that we requested that the skills development initiatives, the percentage of spend must be on EWSETA accredited skills. And the reason we did that is because we noticed that people were getting access to international training, which our young people don't have access to. In order for you to get access to opportunities, you would have to probably do short courses that are internationally accredited. And therefore we said, let's limit it to South African. If the sector wants a local qualification, we'll work together and develop it. The last point there, I've just mentioned the work we're doing with ESCOM. And I think we've also focused on the Renewable Energy Industry Association work to avoid going to individual employers. If you go to the last slide, not this one, this, and I think maybe the previous one, I've got a lot of, I prepared for 17 minutes. And I just want to reflect here what's coming from employers. The reason I said some of the demand that's coming from employers, electricity, and I'm going to just highlight at the bottom too. Marketing of electricity is not a challenge right now. We're not talking marketing of electricity. And yet we are going to start moving into the space where if you are generating, you'll have to sell the electricity. We're seeing it in Europe. We will not talk about it now, but we'll talk about it when it's now needed on the day. Construction of pylons, we don't see it featuring anywhere in the skills that are demanded. We currently talk in generation, and that's why we will generate and have no battery storage. We will generate and not have a grid to generate. And that goes to planning. Do we have the capabilities to plan for a transition that is going to benefit our country right now, that is going to consider generation, transmission, and distribution, and all the entire value chain? So that's one of the key areas that we've been looking at from a planning perspective, that we're not having a holistic conversation. Just to conclude, I see the referee with the red card. Just to conclude, I think there's certain conversations that we sometimes do not want to have. And I'm going to give an example of the hydrogen economy. Water is a challenge in South Africa. And we know that we require clean water for production of hydrogen, but we're not having that conversation. We will have it once policies have been signed and financing is here. Renewable energy capacity is required. We can't generate right now for us to keep lights on, but we will need it for production of green hydrogen. I'm going to fight the referee today, but I think it's sometimes we need to have those uncomfortable conversation and put them on the table and sometimes agree to disagree. I'm feeling very uncomfortable in this room because there's a lot of challenges, a lot of issues that we are concerned about. But my question is that when we leave this room, will we address these issues or will we continue with the plans that I had, CSIR were what they had, and the PCC with the plans that they've had? I hope that we come together. And I think the last slide, referee. The last one, this one, thank you, but the previous one. This one is where I think we've realized that there's a number of sectors that are going to be involved when it comes to just energy transition. It's not only energy. And therefore, as a SETA, we will be launching a roundtable of SETAs to contribute to implementing the just energy transition framework, where we can sit together and avoid the research duplication. I'm already doing research in hydrogen, another SETA is doing research in hydrogen skills. There's also funding that we are duplicating, and we're not seeing impact on the funding, and also to look at how do we also make sure that there's an ecosystem of skills that are required for the country and not just for the sector. And this will require that each SETA brings the industry players on the table, and we hopefully that will be sort of a one picture that South Africa requires for the just energy transition. And thank you very much, referee, for your kindness.
Thank you, and that was very good. And I think the idea of SETA on table is an excellent one. So our last speaker, before we get into some table discussions, is Wendy Poulton from SANEA today, who's going to talk to us about the work they've been doing on specific skills transitions in the energy space. Thanks, Wendy.
Good afternoon, everybody. And I'm going to be presenting together with Nicola Jenkin, who has been doing the work with me, and Prisha as well. So this is work that SANEA started a couple of years ago, because through the BRICS work that we've done, we've seen a number of energy skills roadmaps done, which try and go a little bit more out into the future and say, what's going to be required? So next slide, please. The objectives of the work were really to, first of all, try and understand what has already been done. We've been talking all of today about how many different activities there are going on, and we wanted to put it all in one place. So we've got a database of over 200 initiatives that we analyzed. The EWSETA has kindly offered to be the repository for that information so that new people that are coming on board that are doing work on energy skills or the just energy transition work can go to that repository and see what's already been done. We can't divide our effort the way we've been doing it up until now. So that was the one thing. And the other one was to then look at what are some of these major pathways that we're going to be for skills development in the country. So next slide. We understood, and a number of these points have been raised today, that it really is important to look at not just the technology trends, but the broader just transition issues. What's the journey that we're going to have to take? Often we just talk about the endpoint and we don't talk about how we're going to get there. The scales of magnitude and timing have been mentioned a number of times. The level of readiness of the system, and you'll see in the results that we've really tried to take a systemic approach and understand that even if you have a technology that's ready, you may not have a policy environment that's ready. And then is it just, and then also try and bring in the element of risk and uncertainty. We've heard a lot of talk today about planning, and obviously planning is a future related activity, and so it's uncertain. And so how do you deal with some of that? So next one. So this is the process that we followed. We started off by doing this desktop study where we looked at these 200 reports. We saw what was in there. We looked at what skills they talked about in there. We looked at the policy actions. We looked at technology actions as well. And I'll show you some of the results of that. We then moved on to doing a series of workshops that many of you have attended. So thank you for that, where we did the foresighting exercise. We said, what trends do we see happening going forward? And we built on the work that was done by NBI in their pathways work, plus what is in the IEP, etc. So we didn't try to invent a new wheel. We tried to put it all in one place again. And then from there, we then did a number of analyses looking at, which Nicola will talk to now, which looked at a job sector analysis, what current jobs are being advertised at the moment in South Africa and where. So we start getting down to those geographic locations as well. And we analyzed the work from the workshops. We took each of the trends, and in the workshops, what we did was, once we'd agreed the trends, we got the people in the workshop to say, what impacts that trend and what does this trend impact? So that you start looking at the systemic understanding of what's going to happen. So we did an analysis on that, and we took each of those trends and then said, so what skills are required for those trends and what is the implications for the education system? And where we are at the moment is writing that all up, and we're going to show you some preliminary results of that. So next slide. This is the work that some of the work that came out of the first step, which was looking at these 200 different publications of skills-related work in South Africa. A lot of the skills work was done around technologies. So it's quite narrow in the way in which it looked at the skills system. So it would look at, because it's driven by people's interests, so it would be renewables only or solar only or hydrogen only or whatever. And there wasn't this integrated view of what would be needed, although many of the skills were common across those different technologies. And it's not necessarily market driven either. So people were not necessarily understanding what are the bigger skills that you would need to have a successful project or to have an enabling regulatory or market environment or financing strategy that would be required to make these projects actually happen on the ground. Not value chain based either, which isn't surprising, given the top point. And then there were some soft skills that were mentioned, and I found in our work that it's so critical to have some of these skills. Some of them have been mentioned today: critical thinking, problem solving, being able to have emotional intelligence, negotiation skills, all those kinds of things were mentioned, but not in any detail. And then lastly, the policy, the integrated policy was lacking, and the integrated skills planning at the time, what we heard today, there's some work going on that. And social dimensions were included, but at a very superficial level in most of the studies, with the exception of the CSIR work that was, which is one shining example on the co-benefit study that was done, which really started getting into the detail around some of the socioeconomic issues. So next slide, please. We also looked at sort of what's happening in the global market. South Africa is obviously different because of our coal base. And so the impact of this energy transition is going to be much bigger. Next slide, please. And then we did the trends work. And we had major trends, which I don't think will be of any surprise to any of you. But underneath that, we had clusters of trends. And we tried to look at when they start and stop. And we actually had a list of about 20. We chose these as the top 6, and there are, as I said, a whole lot of subclusters underneath them. So they are, I can't see from here, it's a problem with the setup. It's the widening energy, oh, thank you. The widening energy skills gap, the deteriorating energy security, obviously, which is a huge issue for South Africa. Climate change, both adaptation and decarbonisation. This shift towards sector coupling through the electrification drive that is happening. And so therefore the links to electric vehicles, etc. Evolving energy markets, so the way that the electricity sector is changing, but also how energy is changing from oil to hydrogen over time in this period, which was up to 2050. And then also this automation and digitalization. Automation being a really critical one. We've been talking about renewables and how maintenance, not maintenance, but operation doesn't require a lot of people on the ground. So we looked at this, we did a systems diagram, we understood the drivers of it. And then next slide. We also did a set of scenarios. So I'd be interested to talk to Rebecca about hers. We named ours after Beatles songs, my favorite being Here Comes the Sun, which is the upbeat scenario. And we looked at these trends over time and said, what are some of the things that could happen under these different scenarios for these trends, and what would be the implications for skills? And there's some very clear no regret options where they're going to happen in every single scenario, but they may happen at different times or at different levels of quantity of skills that you would need. So those are renewable energy, energy efficiency, which has really fallen off the bandwagon in my view. This drive for prosumerism, the financing skills and energy security, because in this time frame, we think it's going to be a critical still, but especially in the near term. And then there's some uncertainties, sometimes about timing and sometimes about whether we're going to go down that route around gas, nuclear, the kind of market we're going to have, especially for electricity, and then when and how green hydrogen is going to be introduced. And then declining, I meant to add oil on there as well, apologies, that's my mistake, coal and oil. And then there's a whole lot of skills that are also going to be required no matter what for the socioeconomic implications for the just side. The next slide. So I'm going to hand over to Nicola, who then has done a lot more detailed work on what's the implications for jobs.
Thanks. I've already seen the yellow card. So just very quickly, we just want to show a quick touch point. So for every trend, we did a deep dive. We said, what's the impact of that trend on the world of work? So this is the first phase before you even go to skills. And you can see we've identified just under that 4 potential implications on work. And then who's that going to affect or what's required, and the likelihood of what's actually needed in terms of the implication on work. And we've done that for all those trends Wendy showed us. Next slide, please. Then what we said is we did a fascinating piece of work looking at job advert analysis. We identified 700 energy-related jobs within 1 month in South Africa. And what was really interesting is then for each of those sub-trends or implications on work, we then said, what are the people that are going to be needed or currently being advertised? It just shows you complexity, okay? The other thing is it's place-based, and that's really becoming a story that's emerging from today. What's also really interesting is you're going to have specific specialisms like in electric vehicle sales reps, green hydrogen analysts. But then you're going to, and then you've got a variety for renewable energy, if it's solar or wind. And then you've got the dark gray purple, which says procurement officer. Now they may need a solar bit of knowledge, but they're actually applicable across the energy, doesn't matter what it is. So I just wanted to show you that what's going to come out at the end of this is this for every implication on work, for every trend. Okay, and we're going to try and do it regionally, where the big hotspots are. Next slide, please. This is the last one. And then it says, taking that picture on demand, and we're also doing future as much as one can. And we're going to say, this is current provisioning, which is all quite traditional, and many of you have tapped into that. We've also got the informal, which I thought was very important, which was raised earlier. And there's a proliferation of short courses because the employers are demanding it. And there's a little bit of a lack of control in that. So what is the required provisioning for all of this based on all of that unpicking that's being done? So that, I think, is actually my final slide. Again, a bit whiz bang. Oh, one more. Is there one more? Yep. Oh, sorry, yeah. Next steps, recommendations. Next slide. Final slide. Okay, so we're going to do a survey, please. We really, if anyone's interested, we always try and capture voices. I'm sure it's gone to colleagues of yours in offices, but you know, if you're here, we really want to capture your name and we'd like to share it and hear your voice. Going to be launched end of January in person, but we're looking at online. And then the areas of further work is the focus along the horizon. So what are some of those? You need to take that horizon into consideration. occupation and job atlases, so which are really important for HR, particularly in businesses. Employee workplace, EWSETA mentioned this, and looking at pathways. So apologies for not deep diving, and that was my last slide. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I mean, I think the overwhelming impression of today is that we are definitely not starting from a zero base. I mean, there's a lot of really good stuff that's happening locally, nationally. So that's really exciting. I wanted to see if there are any sort of urgent burning issues that people want to raise for this discussion. Otherwise, I want to get on to the last exercise of the day. There's two questions at the back in the back table, and one here and one here. Please go ahead.
Good afternoon, colleagues. My name is Notiswa Libala from the Economic Development Partnership. And yeah, definitely my comment is around partnering and collaboration. We've talked a lot about that today. And I like Paul's point around the collaboration platforms that are in place, because I've been listening here today, all the speakers that have been speaking about skills, employment. I'm hoping that there will be something around Harambee, whom I think they have done a lot of work when it comes to strategies around unemployment in South Africa, as well as having the database of the skills needed across the sectors. And I didn't really hear anyone speaking about Harambee. And I think if we moving into a collaborative space of partnership, I will strongly recommend that we need to partner with Harambee to avoid the duplications, because there's a lot of work that has been done by them. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there a question opposite to you?
Yeah, good afternoon to the colleagues. And today, my name is Mushtaq Ali, and the hat I'm wearing while sitting here, and not Vijay Naidu, please, colleagues. I'm not Mr. QCTO. And the person would know why I'm saying that. But yeah, today the hat that I'm wearing at this specific platform is out of the Minerals Council, which is the Chamber of Mines, or used to be the Chamber of Mines. And mines is more comment and doesn't have to necessarily be answered right now, because I've had a lot of conversation around reskilling and upskilling. But I think what is important to whatever solution we want to put on the table is understanding the extent of the reskilling, upskilling, and whether it can be done. Because the challenge you're going to sit with, and coming from the mining sector, is getting a deep understanding, and it's something that we're trying to do out of my desk in mining, getting a deep understanding of what your skills density currently is within the sector. Once you have an understanding of that skills density, then you can turn around and say, what am I going to use as proxy to then develop new skills or upskill? And we need to be brutally honest with ourselves. We may be faced with a situation where opportunities might not be always existing from one to the other. And I heard colleagues talk about collaboration and working together, because then is when the rubber is going to hit the tarmac, when you're going to have to turn around and say to individuals, as we transit into this new arena, there may not be an opportunity on A, but there's an opportunity on B, and it may not be as good as A was. And if you read in terms of some of the international stuff that we've been busy with, and I've been busy with, and you look at your German model, when they transited from coal to alternative energies and looking at a green economy, their situation wasn't unemployment in excess of 30%. Their situation wasn't an unskilled workforce or low literacy levels or low educational levels. Their issue wasn't around infrastructure investment and ability to invest in the transitions. And I think, colleagues, you know, we're looking at a lot of spaces, but we also need to look into these spaces and understand very deeply what would these mean going down the line. I don't want to give a keynote address, but yeah, I think these are conversations that we need to have on a regular basis. And I was saying to one of the colleagues, I'm actually at a stage that I'm tired of research and surveys and what have you. We've already got a few low-hanging fruit, and we need to address those first before we consider moving on. Just transition is not going to get us fully up and running by 2030. If you believe that's going to happen, you're in la la land. It's going to take a bit longer than that. And I'm sorry for being so brutally honest, but I'm experiencing this at a ground level. So please, these are some of the things we need to consider. Thanks.
Thank you. Was there a point here and then there, and then there and then here?
Okay, thank you, Chairperson. Maybe Chairperson, let me then request a green card from you before I start, so that I should not get the red card. Chair, I'm talking. You are speaking to. I'm Victor Hadeb. I'm speaking as a resident of Mpumalanga, who happens to participate and sit in certain forums of community there in Mpumalanga, which is we are an affected community, and because our province, it is directly affected by these challenges. So, Chair, maybe what I want to raise one thing, which is we've seen a number of people coming in our province and going out. Sometimes we will think it's tourists that are coming to visit our province, because we know our province is also dominating in terms of tourism. Yet people are coming there to do their own things, and they come and sit here and say they've done research. Secondly, Chair, I know that there's been a lot of funding that is moving around for these projects of renewable energies. And it's very much easy now to pop out money for a renewable energy or a climate change program. But I'm a bit worried as well in terms of that, because I don't know whether is now a new way of trying to colonialize us as a country and a province in particular. But over and above that, there's these things used to be called structural adjustment programs, which they came with a very negative things in our society, privatization in particular. We have just built power stations now that are coal users, Minupi and Kusile. And you are telling us that in the next 5 or 10 years, you will also be doing that to those power stations, like what we have done at Komati. And now, again, the thinking from the government, why want to do this thing, which we know that is not going to be usable in future? Why spending so much money, which that money is supposed to be invested in uplifting the communities and bringing service to the people? We are having TVET colleges currently, which are struggling financially. And we're having sitters, which we know some of them are unable to even spend enough money for the year in terms of their own programs. They always underspend in terms of now funding for educational programs and skills development within those companies. I know that the CEO is here, and she has actually spoke a lot in terms of now what you have seen on the ground happening. I understand, Chair, that you can only redo something if you have done it before. But you cannot redo something if you haven't done anything. I see here talking about reskilling, read with this, read what, and you cannot come and want to reskill us in Mpumalanga if you haven't skilled us before. There was no skilling program that you have embarked upon. And now you're coming and sitting here and telling us that you want to reskill us. And to me, it's a serious contrast in terms of maybe it's a language that I don't understand, but I understand. But I'm saying these terms that have been put here, sometimes I also found myself wanting whether am I in the right place or not? Because one other challenge that I also have, Chair, in terms of these things, there's a lot of discussions that have happened about the Mpumalanga province, but outside Mpumalanga province. As a result now, it's like the Mpumalanga province doesn't have leadership, doesn't have people that will be able to do things. Instead, we have to rely to Gauteng as if Gauteng is a co-owner of our province. And that's not right. Now we're putting this as part of reclaiming now the process. If there's going to be anything about Mpumalanga, let's go to Mpumalanga. Let's go and engage there. Let's meet people there and see what's happening. It can't be good that we'll be sitting in Gauteng, of course, in the nice fancy places which it specializes with. We may not have, but we do have resources as well in Mpumalanga. That needs to be considered. Maybe, Chair, I also want to put this thing here in this meeting, that there's something that is a problem to our community, and it's more like a bubble that's about to burst at any time. Why I'm saying this? We see our resources getting out of the province, helping other people that will not benefiting us. That's the first part. The second part, we see outsiders coming into our province, doing things without us being involved as a province. And Chair, now the other aspect which is most painful is that we, as communities in Mpumalanga, we've become now social workers, or maybe so to say the counselors in terms of trying to counsel people that are out of work, people that cannot know what to do going beyond from this. And that becomes our problem. And the people that are taking decisions to actually close power stations there are not from Mpumalanga. and we have put our lives in a standstill to wait for a better future, like in a Bible, that we will be going to a promised land of some sort. And there's no promised land yet. We're not sure of what we're talking about. How is it going to transpire into what we see and envisage as a province, as the people of the province now? So I'm saying, I'm putting the PCC on the spot here to, firstly, to make yourselves available in Mpumalanga when you're needed, and talk to people of the Mpumalanga and understand the frustrations that they're getting there. It's a nice language, the green economy, green skills, green whatever. I'm not sure whether even green is a real green or green is a new red in terms of how we see things happening in our province. Let me stop there for now, Chair, but I just wanted to raise these things because I'm sitting with the challenge of how having these things are actually provoking the community. And I'm sitting here, Chair, knowing exactly what we feel on the ground there. Thanks.
Thank you. And we hear the challenge, and certainly we do have programs in Mpumalanga. We come to Mpumalanga often, but we need to come more. And there was a question at the back. And if we can try to be quick, I'm conscious of our time.
No, thanks, Chairperson. I will not be long. In fact, mine will not be a question. Rather, I will try to influence the ED when he's making his closing remarks. So mine will be a point of influence, so that what he will say when he's giving a way forward will be what I would have said. So I'm lobbying Dr. Oliver on this one. Chairperson, we have throughout the day, and I mean, I cannot overemphasize the point that there seems to be fatigue in relation to conference, dialogue, symposium, summits, and so on. And I think one thing that is coming out strongly here is that probably, as you have said, that we have brought two committees together. I would assume that maybe the activists that might be much more focusing on climate change as a whole, and those who are focusing on the skills aspect. But probably in future, you may wish to have a focus on skills. Because the time from where I was saying, I don't think, I mean, everything was rushed. Maybe now, as now we have tried to integrate the two committees, you may wish to have got time specifically for the skills fraternity. as you have seen that there's a lot of work that has been done. That's the point, that's the first point, Chairperson. But the second one, and that conversation, given this conference fatigue, it should be timely, pointed, and impactful and result-oriented. So we should not just have conversations, and there is not something that we may have to do on the ground or test on the ground. The three other points pointed. One, there's consensus that out of all the conversations that we're having, there has to be funding. Where are we getting funding? And two, that I think there's also consensus that planning is and coordination is fragmented. I mean, we're operating in silos. The CEO of EWSETA confirmed that. And the last point, there is also a strong view that is in agreement that there is a need for social partnership. And I think if I were to be the executive director, those points, I would not miss them as I close the session and summarize. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And I'm sure we'll agree. There's a middle table question, and then we'll come to you. And then, sorry, before the middle table, there's someone that's been very patient online, Masuli, if they wouldn't mind making their point quickly. Mustn't forget the online community.
Hi, thank you very much. Thank you for recognizing me, Chair. Yes, I've been listening, to the conversation, which is very much progressive as the world is transitioning towards the, the green economy and the just transition that we are embarking on. And I think the discussion and the concepts are some of them are abstract, but also they are complex in nature, which might create anxieties on other domains and other people who may be affected by this just transition. But my point today that I want to to engage with or to share, I'm grappling with the way how we as South Africa having so much institutions that are working, seemingly try to work for common goal, but they together. Mpo mentioned, one fundamental aspect, and I think there was a much emphasis on TVET colleges and the skills development and the future skills that are going to be required to, in order to address and facilitate and help the build of the just transition. But what we see, and at the moment, around the TVET space, there is a transition that is moving from the old conventional artisanship, to I think now there's a new concept or new name that they are calling it. It's I forgot, for the new naming of, I think is the occupation certificates, from trade test to occupation certificates. But this transition is currently happening at the moment, while we are also challenged with, these energy skills that the TVET sector needs to address, but does not feature into that realm. So the energy transition and skills development managed by QCTO is not also taking into account the current changes that are happening within the TVET sector and the qualifications thereof. So there's a disconnect, which again, 3-5 years later, we're going to have to go back and revise, to the point of the previous speaker that, 10 years ago, we were building power stations that are, thermal power stations. And today we need to mothball those power stations because we are now looking at the future and we're becoming more futuristic. And that's one point that I wanted to engage on. The second point is, I'm also from Pumala. There are activities, that are happening, but for me, I want to be part of a lot of, of these activities, but often hardly see where are they happening, where are they being advertised. We only get to see things after the fact, after the conference, after the engagements, where are the multi-stakeholder engagements are coming. And the previous speaker what I could really sense, from him, the guy from Mpumalanga, I didn't get his name, apologies for that, is surfacing another worldview from the Mpumalanga perspective that people are excluded. I'm connecting from Turkey at the moment because I'm interested in the just transition, but I'm also here to research about the hydrogen, hydrogen cells and the fuel economy. In South Africa, none of the colleges are offering at the moment, currently, is still using DHET subject and NCVs, but none of them, they are really focusing on, solar PV. You don't get that. You get it at higher institutions like VETS, University, UCT, but they are not active at colleges where we would need those, those artisans to address the skill gap. And then moving to the scenario analysis. So I'm doing I'm doing a research within climate change and sustainability and leadership. I know I don't want to take much of the time, but in closing, maybe I would engage with the other stakeholders after the fact, is how do we get to engage and how do we, become inclusive is particularly the just transition, as it's going to impact, a lot of people and a lot of jobs. How are we going to engage better? What we have, and I think we have to agree on our conversation today, is the fact that even though there are research going on and there is information that is coming out and feedback and data, but the communication and the engagements is not enough. And maybe we should first define what good engagements and engaging the communities that are going to be impacted by these decisions, into the future. How do we get young kids, particularly, already engaged into this particular transition? Because most of us in that room in 2050 and beyond, we might not be present. And we are discussing about that future of which they are not part of. So how do we also do that? I think there's a study from Canada, Roger Martin, they did a study that I would like those who are in the forefront of research regarding, change in societies for a better good, to look at Roger Martin's study that they did in Canada. That might help as well as to how to include young kids in the space and to spark interest as well. I'm an engineer myself. I'm a mechanical engineer, but that is getting, it's no longer relevant. Kind of engineering, robotics and control, computer science, that is becoming or more emerging. So how do we get those into the space? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thanks for joining us online. Okay, then we had a point here, and then a point here, and then a final point. 2 final points from the noisy table.
Steve, I hope I'll be quick.
Thank you.
But one, I think we all need to be seated here and be very real with ourselves. We were all pushing for the repurposing of Komati. But we all made a mess, because as much as we kept saying there's not enough information in the public domain, there's not enough engagement, the plan continued. And today I can tell that people have lost their jobs and nobody is available to be held accountable. And this is one critical question we need to ask. If something wrong happens, who do we hold accountable? Because people are losing their livelihoods. The second aspect I think we need to learn from Komati, it's not only formal workers who lost their jobs. The whole informal economy has been affected. And in terms of our planning, in terms of our research, I don't see how we bring that informal economy on board. We keep talking about how we will reskill workers, how we will reskill people at TVET colleges. We need to acknowledge the fact that the coal economy in South Africa, and especially in Mpumalanga, was built on the premise of cheap labor, which is mainly unskilled labor. And we're not even talking about minimum requirements for reskilling or retraining. We're just talking reskilling and retraining. We don't even mention. I think it's only ILO that said we need to think about the middle skills. But that was it, you know. So I think we need to take that into consideration. I'm not happy with the fact that, and I think this is a repetition. We've got a university in Mpumalanga, and all of this research that is being spoken about here, none of it is coming from Mpumalanga University. Then we talk about skill, we talk about sharing expertise. How are we going to share those expertise and skills with the University of Mpumalanga so that they begin to drive research in the province? Nobody's talking about that. And we know that most of these well-established universities have enough resources, have the capacity to mobilize resources to do research. Why aren't they sharing those resources with the university in Mpumalanga? So I think that's one thing we need to think about. Lastly, I think what is important to me is there's a lot that's happening. Today we're talking skills, tomorrow we'll be talking something different. Everyone has a plan, and that plan is forecast in Mpumalanga or in other areas. But the question is, how do we involve the people? And how do we centralize all of these plans? I mean, if I just do a reflection of the number of meetings or workshops I've attended this year, it's different role players, all the same message. We've got Sestutu from the provincial office. We've got the Mpumalanga Green Cluster. Why can't we use them as a central coordination point so that at least we begin to align all of these processes, and then we can start pumping those resources to them rather than all of us doing the same thing and duplicating all of those processes? Because tomorrow we'll be coming back here and saying we don't have resources, but we're all doing research on the same study. So it's a waste of the limited resources. We've got two people who've shown that they're passionate. We've got the cluster. Better still, the Mpumalanga Green Cluster has created a portal that people can share that information in the portal. They can share their projects so that for those who want information, they can visit the portal and get information. But it's not happening. You know, we come here, we get bits and pieces of information, and then we're gone. Next year, we've got a little bit of different information. But also, I think we need to understand what is the role of the commission in Mpumalanga. Because now it seems we've got one session that is being organized by the PCC. It's about just transition. Tomorrow, I'm going to meet the Green Cluster again. We're talking about the just transition. So I think we need to be very clear about if the PCC is going to support the JT framework in Mpumalanga, what role are they playing and who are they supporting, so that we are very clear as to what's our point of departure when we begin to engage with these things. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Yeah, some really good points. I mean, I think these themes of procedural justice have come up over and over. This idea of tourist research, I like that phrase, I think is an important thing. And then coordination, and some of that has to do with the role of the PCC. You know, we see ourselves playing a coordination role. Our Labour colleagues.
Sure, thanks, Steve. I think we should be looking at the stage at the JET-IP and how it is we can craft the skills element on the JET-IP. At the current stage, the JET-IP has allocated 0.1% to skills, which I've raised both at NETLAC and the previous session we've had in the PCC, that this is not sufficient if we're looking to want to improve the skills or develop skills in the just transition. I also would like to put emphasis on the points relating to collaboration. It's going to be important that we have meaningful partnership and engagements when we speak to skills in the just transition. This must be inclusive, especially with regards to the participation of the trade union movement. This is not putting to any disrespect to the informal sector. The informal sector is quite important. And in our framing of the just transition, we've appreciated that the informal sector is quite a dominant part of especially the coal mining value chain, and that we're trying to work around how we actually merge the two with regards to dealing and addressing with the dislocation of people in the coal value chain. I think also I liked how Mpho phrased her presentation. CETAs are going to be very important with regards to ensuring that there's some form of coordination, but also that we're able to have sufficient skills framing when it comes to the just transition. So it's going to be important that we are merged into the processes that are taking place. And I think the PCC at this stage is rightly placed, especially because it will be housed at NEDLAC to facilitate these discussions across stakeholders. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Commissioner?
Thank you. Maybe thank you so much for the presentations that we got. All the time I was querying the presentations, I never said thank you, but let me say thank you for the presentations. Let me take from the seriousness that we should show about this. The coordination is covered. Now, I mean, if we give 0.1% to skills, it doesn't matter how much we speak. If we can't fund it, we're not going to have it. Who is gonna, if we don't even project for it more than 0. I'm just imagining 0.1% and what it can do if you consider our socioeconomic challenges. And again, you got 0.3 for economic diversification. Tell me it's a joke with no punchline that you would have 0.3 and say you want to diversify the economy. Just to help the issue of information fatigue in the next meetings that we might have, I want to suggest that we send presentations up front that will help us to have an idea of what to expect. Right now, it's like we're going to a prophetic church. We just have to expect anything that comes. So I think it shouldn't be like that. Let's be allowed to read and focus our minds, because now information fatigue will make us very unproductive. And I'm sorry, I apologize for those who go to the prophetic churches.
Okay, thank you. Julia?
Thanks so much. Yeah, it's been a really interesting day and really interesting presentations. I just wanted to add a thought about. Oh, sorry. Hi, I'm Julia Taylor from Wits University. I wanted to add a thought about gender, and a few people had picked up on gender during the presentations, but I think a kind of dimension that hasn't really been addressed is that not only do we need to make sure that there are jobs available for women and that there's training available, but we also need to kind of address the wider reasons for why women aren't able to participate, which is often because they take on the unpaid care work that happens in the household. They take on healthcare, education, water and food provision within the household. And so when we think about a just transition, we need to think about those services as well. And jobs can actually be created in those spaces as well. So areas like within care work, healthcare, education, and then basic services, water provision, energy and infrastructure would all kind of improve basic service provision, which is also at risk when, mines close down and they're providing the water. So that's just another dimension I wanted to comment on. Thanks.
Yeah, brilliant. So, I mean, a kind of quick reflection from my side, and then I'm going to ask the DDG if he has 2 or 3 thoughts, and then hand over to Crispin to close. But, it's been an incredibly rich conversation today, and I know that it's been incredibly information heavy and lots of presentations, but I think what it points to is there's a lot of thinking and going on. Coordination came up often, and part of today was about that. Let's just put on the table who's doing what, and we didn't get everything. I mean, as we came along, we picked up more. We should maybe given a labor specific moment to talk about what they're doing, particularly on the labor market side. So it's never quite complete, but I think it's been a fascinating first attempt. I mean, just to get a sense from the room, it seems to me that we would all like more of these sessions, perhaps with a more opportunity to talk and with presentations circulated beforehand. Is that a general feeling? Is there anyone who doesn't want to come back and have another detailed conversation? I should ask this.
It depends where we're holding it
next time. Yeah. Okay, so I think it's and encouraging outcome to say that we want to engage more. And certainly I've had the sense from the people in the room that they also want to engage more. So that's great. So we will work on setting that up in the first quarter of next year as a kind of follow-up to this conversation, and we can get into the weeds of implementation and start to think about some of these partnerships. But I'm going to ask the DDG just for a few wrap-up thoughts and then hand over to Crispian to close for us.
Well, I should think, Program Director, we have achieved what we wanted to achieve today. So I'm more excited and elated because when I also came and stood here earlier in the morning, I made the point that this is not Alpha and Omega. This is the beginning. I should think this is what transpired, whether you look at it horizontal or vertical, is that we need more engagement. But then obviously centrally, we know that the focus has been for skills for a just climate transition in Indaba. So that was basically the intention. For me, if you ask me, we have achieved what we wanted to achieve, because at least we are starting this conversation. I know at some point it might have been in September or so where we coined this session that we need to get together so that we can begin to speak about skills which are going to be required for JCT. And I should think we've done quite very well. Instead of leaving this session feeling really so fatigued, we should leave today feeling so energized and so elated and saying that at least we have brought almost all of us together under one roof and we began the process. And I fully agree, there is going to be more engagements and some of them are going to be more focused. And we agree that let's involve almost everybody. Because if we are saying it's a just transition, it must be a just transition, not unjust transition. It can only be just if everybody is participating in the process, all stakeholders, everybody. And we know, these processes, sometimes they can take long. Some of the skills that we need them by yesterday, but we need to be patient with each other. We are a nation of social dialogue. We have started, at least now, this dialogue, and we are going to continue to dialogue. People must not feel constrained to say whatever you would wish to say in an occasion of this nature. Because if you leave the room without having said what you would have wished to have said, so you are not going to feel well with yourself. You are going to be unhealthy. You can't be healthy. If there is something that you have not raised, you would have wished to have raised. So I should think for me, we just need to put hands together for all of us who have come here since 9 o'clock and be patient, we've been here, and then we continue. And it seems as if no one is tired here. And people, they can discuss if they're engaging on these issues up until the following morning. So that's the energy that we require. So from my side, I'm quite very happy. My esteemed colleagues, I said when we started, there is no one who's dishonorable here. We are all honorable. So we can put hands together for all of us. Thanks very much.
Thank you, DDG Mvalo. And as you can see, it's been an absolute pleasure to work with the Department of Higher Education and Training on this, as well as the Energy and Water SETA. So I want to just make a few, it's been an incredibly rich discussion. I'm not going to try and summarize it or repeat everything that has been said, maybe a few points. And let me start with the issue that Commissioner Mbodi raised about the pace of the transition. And I hear a lot of anxiety in the room about the pace. And this is not you just talking off your heads, because there's genuinely anxiety across our society about this transition. And that's because there are very serious consequences. So, you know, I know that you're speaking on behalf of many people when you express anxiety about the pace of the transition. And I just want to offer a few reflections. These are not answers. So there's some things we can control, and there's some things that I'm afraid are beyond our control. And one of the things that is beyond our control is this thing called the market. I know NUMSA rails against the market, and they would like to discipline it by diktat, by revolutionary diktat. But what is happening in the global economy is that it is moving rapidly to decarbonize. And we're faced with a strategic choice. And, you know, the way I look at this question of pace, too fast, and we are going to liquidate huge sectors of our economy before we've put the measures in place to cushion that. That's why when we say just transition, people often forget that there's this word transition in the issue. It's a transition, and we're going to move slowly and steadily in that transition. But you do need to be aware that there's another risk, which is that we transition too slowly. And if we go too slowly, there are a couple of very serious threats that we're going to have to confront. The one is that our products that we produce as this country and which are exported have the highest emissions intensity of any country in the world. And I know there are historical reasons for that. But when the global market, and I say when, not if, when the global market moves to penalize high emission products, we do not want to be standing there and squeezed completely out of the global trading system, because it's going to equally liquidate whole economic sectors. So we don't want to move too slowly, and we don't want to miss out on the technology and investment that's going to build the sectors for the future. So these are careful calculations, and they're calculations that mustn't just be made by a bunch of environmentalists sitting in a corner saying we want a future green economy. These are national development questions. They must be made by all of us, and particularly by people that stand to lose the most in this transition. So I'm talking about workers and communities and young people that are most at risk of losing their jobs, losing their livelihoods. They've got to be at the table. There are other things we can't control. And I mean, I know people are furious that we are talking about decommissioning in the midst of the most profound energy crisis we've ever had as a country, and in a way that seems to be clearly before we've got these other sectors up and running. So Komati's been raised. My understanding of Komati was it was at the end of its design life. There was nothing we could do other than rebuilding a new coal-fired power station with Komati. This had been extended. Remember, it was mothballed at one stage, then it was restarted. It had reached the end of its safe operating design. And there's an additional issue, which many of you are probably aware of, which is around the air quality standards that we've implemented. And the air quality standards, just for those of you that aren't aware of the history, are a result of tireless campaigning by communities in Mpumalanga who say that we are being poisoned by the failure to properly regulate the emissions. So the net result of that is that standards have been imposed on Eskom. Eskom's in breach of all the standards now. Legally, they're in a very horrendous position. There was a class action raised which forced the minister to force them to comply. And the only way they can comply is by retrofitting on the whole of their coal fleet, flue gas desulfurization and scrubbers. That sounds easy to say. It's about 50 billion rand a power station to do that retrofit. Eskom doesn't have that money. So even if Komati hadn't reached the end of their design life, to continue operating legally, they would have had to spend this additional 50 billion, which they don't have. So I actually don't think we had many choices other than how we do the decommissioning and how we do the repurposing and the economic diversification. And I've heard a lot of criticisms. I mean, I'm not here to make excuses for Eskom or the way that they've done it, but I'm just putting it in the box of, so there are things we can control, there are things that we can't control. I don't think that's something we could have controlled. I think the decision to decommission was beyond our control. I think the way we decommissioned was within our control, and maybe we didn't do it properly. But I want to come back to this discussion we've been having and the focus in particular on skills and the just transition. Sorry, just before I end, we will continue to argue about this issue of pace because, as I said, it's a strategic issue and it's a development question. What I want us to make sure of is that while we debate pace, and I think there are some very important nuances, including, you know, there's some decisions still coming in front of us that we're going to have to make. The one thing we don't want to do is find that the transition arrives and we've not done anything to prepare for it. So as a risk mitigation measure, we must move now to put in place the economic diversification and the skills development and the social support and the other mechanisms that make the just transition a reality. So on those, we must move urgently. And in moving urgently, I don't want you to feel that we've taken away your ability to still debate the pace. But there are things we must do now, and they're urgent. And one of them is teeing up a major investment in skills for the future economy. We must do it. We must find the money. 0.01% of the DHET IP is totally inadequate. And we're in the process of consulting about it. And I know this is one of the issues that labor and communities and civil society are going to raise very strongly. And I can assure you, where I sit in the PCC, I will be there with you, shouting about this level of investment. It's wholly inadequate. I was struck by the conversation today. I mean, there's an enormous amount that we have. So we've got a common vision. We're all committed to making this transition a just transition. And we understand what the elements of a just transition are. You know, we want to see investment in economic diversification. We want to see investment in skills. We want income support for workers so that they can transition from one job to the other. We want to guarantee every worker a place in the future economy. We want to support communities to build their climate resilience. These are things we're agreed on. There's no debate about it. We've all got the plans. I mean, we heard today, and we haven't even, touched all of the different initiatives that are underway. But there's outstanding research and planning, and already moves towards implementation in a whole range of areas. There's a whole lot of institutions that have been set up. So we have the whole panoply of SETAs and the DHET's skills planning system. We've got the academic institutions, including in Mpumalanga. We've got the Mpumalanga Green Cluster Agency. We've got Dudu's tireless work on the green economy in Mpumalanga. So we've got, and you've got nationally this, PCC, which stands, somewhere between government and civil society. So we've got a plethora of institutions. We're not short of institutions. And let me say, although I know some of you will throw darts at me, we're not short of money. We've got a mechanism for funding skills development. It's embedded in the skills levy. We've got a huge amount of commitment from international and philanthropic and local private sector organizations to invest in this area. I think our real challenge is not money, it's not institutions, it's not plans. It's two missing things. And the missing things are, first of all, coordination. I think we're hopelessly uncoordinated. We're all running around, and a lot of you already said this. You stand there in Mpumalanga, and there's this whiz of people coming to consult and do things, and you're wondering what is going on. I mean, there's a lot of activity, a lot of commitment, but we're not coordinated. And I hate to say this, but it's our national weakness. We don't implement. And when we get to implementation, the first thing someone says is, you haven't consulted enough. You haven't planned enough. You haven't done this enough. So we go back and we do what is our comfort zone, which is talking, bargaining, planning, but not doing. So I don't think we mustn't, I'm not saying we mustn't consult. We've committed, procedural justice is our lodestar. We will consult until we blue in the face. But while we consult, we must do and make it happen. And we just have to inject the sense of urgency into what we're doing. Let's do it. Because we know what we want to do. We've got the resources and institutions. We're committed to it. Now let's just do it. So I'm sorry, I'm now ranting. I'm preaching. I completely endorse this idea. I think we should set up a regular ongoing forum. I think we need to think about coordination at different levels. So not just nationally and pulling the national resources together, but provincially and locally and on the ground. So we must think of how coordination happens at different levels without being too prescriptive and bureaucratic, focusing on action, doing stuff, making it happen. So on that note, thank you very much. And really congratulations to all of our speakers today. I was blown away by what people are doing. It's very inspiring and encouraging. Thank you to our partners for working with us on this event. And thank you to my team who put a lot of work into pulling this together, particularly Simpiwe, who's been quietly sitting at the back, trying to hide and not take the credit. she's been the one really driving this thing all along. So thanks very much.
You may all give me the red card. You are released.